And sometimes it's hard to break out of the bubble here in Washington and remind ourselves that behind these statistics are people's lives, their capacity to do right by their families. It speaks to an urgent need to accelerate job growth in the short term while laying a new foundation for lasting economic growth.
The Senate may be hammering out a health care deal. The General McChrystal from Afghanistan may be testifying before Congress. But President Obama, for the 5th time in the last week, is talking about jobs.
And I'm not sure, but we may have, for the first time since the Clinton era, a full-on presidential lip bite. Top Line starts right now.
Hello and welcome to ABCNews.com's Top Line. I'm David Chalian.
And I'm Rick Klein.
Each weekday, we're bringing you the very latest political headlines, reporting, insight, analysis, everything you need and want to know about politics.
And to keep the conversation going all day long, join us at Twitter. It's twitter.com/TheNote. Let us know what you think.
Kick us off. What is your top line today?
TARP temptation. President Obama this morning outlines his plans for economic development and job creation, but of course, as he knows better than anyone, there's no money to do any of it. And that's where TARP comes in. It's going to cost some $200 billion less than previously anticipated, although it's still quite expensive. And the administration is looking at ways to repurpose some of this money for Main Street, Wall Street bailout funds for Main Street. It's obviously a tempting target to try to use some of these funds, but there's some legal limits here. And
the president acknowledging today in his speech how this is the most unpopular program in history, this bank bailout program, clearly trying to sweeten that just a little bit with the Main Street jobs program there, but also to bring down the deficit, he's saying. We'll talk about that with Senator Gregg in a moment. Nearing a deal? Yes, it looks like that Gang of 10 Senate health care group is nearing a deal and perhaps moving us into the end game on health care. Couple outstanding questions. One, will lowering the age to enter into Medicare for 55 to 65-year-olds to buy into it, will that actually get liberals to drop the public option completely? And will the House actually just agree to whatever the Senate comes up with? That sounds so unbelievably non-Washington to me, but this idea of the ping pong theory of getting the Senate bill directly to the White House for signature is something that many folks are talking about.
You see how tight the margin was in the House last time, and that included a public option. If you take the public option out of there's going to be a lot of liberals who are upset about it. Obviously, there's nothing you can do in the amendment process, but it leaves the conference committee as a possibility. I think there's going to be a lot of folks that just want to make sure that still happens process-wise. Bay State Brawl, our favorite days here on Top Line, are days when actual real-life voters go to the polls, and they're happening not in huge numbers, but it's happening today in Massachusetts, where the primary is underway for the Senate seat to replace Ted Kennedy in the Senate. The favorite is Martha Coakley, who will be the first female senator ever from Massachusetts. And this is a state that has a great political history. It's a crowded four-way primary, and these are senators that end up being players on the national stage for quite a bit of time.
The most salient part of its political history is the fact that even though it's primary day, this is basically general election day. Should Martha Coakley win today, although she has one more step to go, she will next be the United States Senator. Demeaning the president. Yes, that is the charge that Barack Obama made to House Judiciary Committee Chairman John Conyers of Michigan. He called up John Conyers and he said, "You're demeaning me with your recent comments about my policies and my politics." John Conyers wasn't really interested in having that conversation and taking on the president's charge that he's demeaning him.
Well, and you can tell how uninterested he is in that conversation. If he goes and talks publicly about it right afterward, that's a pretty major misreading of the relationship with an important committee chairman. If you think you're having a private communication and he goes public.
Once again, I think we're seeing this Obama White House still having to negotiate a lot of those old dogs in the House that they have not really had fostered relationships with before. We're going to begin with the economy, jobs, the president's speech. We're joined by Republican Senator from the great Granite State, New Hampshire, Judd Gregg. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with the president's idea of now that TARP is apparently going to cost us about $200 billion less than we thought it was going to cost us. He wants to use some of this money for a jobs program. I know you had suggested it really should be used to pay down the debt. Can it be used for both?
No. And in fact, the money doesn't exist. Basically, what he's talking about is using funds which haven't been drawn down, therefore they haven't been borrowed yet from China or wherever we're getting our money these days, so they don't exist. If he's going to spend $200 billion of the TARP money that was never drawn down, that means he has to go out and borrow $200 million, put it on the national debt, put it on our kids' backs, borrow it from China, and spend it on whatever the local stimulus program he has that day. I mean, we've been through 3 or 4 of these stimulus packages. We had an $800 billion one just a little while ago. They've had some effect, but they've also been basically walking around money for appropriators and special interest groups. And the debt has gone up dramatically because of them. I don't think adding another $200 billion of debt here and claiming that you're wrapping it around TARP makes any sense at all, because actually you're not doing anything relative to TARP. All you're doing is borrowing more money.
The TARP legislation gives some discretion to the Treasury Secretary to distribute these funds along some broad guidelines.
Well, there are no funds. No, let's get this right.
Well, do you think it's legal?
No, the way TARP works was the Treasury Secretary had the right to take up to $700 billion, and use it to try to stabilize the financial industry of this country. They've used about $600 billion of those monies to try to stabilize the financial industry of this country and do some other things like the auto bailout. The other $100 billion has not been drawn down, has not been used. Therefore, all of that money was borrowed, by the way. All $700 billion was borrowed from China.
But aren't we getting money back from the banks?
Now, we're getting money back now, but that's not the money he's talking about using. The money that comes back under law, because I wrote the law actually when I was in the room on the TARP negotiations, because I was very concerned about what was going to happen. We started to get all this money back, which I knew we would, and which we're now getting with interest, by the way. The taxpayers are making some money here. All that money by law has to go to reduce the debt. So what he's basically saying is it's the money that wasn't spent, in other words, the money that wasn't borrowed, that he's going to claim that he's using that money, but it doesn't exist. It's a huge shell game to try to give political cover to the fact that he wants to create a new stimulus program of about $200 billion, I guess is the number he's talking about. And it's all going to be borrowed money, which means it's all going to go on the deficit, and it's all going to go on the debt, and it's all going to be paid for by our kids. And they really can't afford it because we're already giving them enough deficit and debt.
And to be clear, you don't think it's legal?
No, what's not legal would be if he were to use the money that had already been repaid under TARP. There's been some big repayments. Initially, $70 billion came in, about $4 billion of that was interest. There's another $45 billion coming in, which there'll be interest on. That money cannot be used for anything other than stabilizing the financial industry of this country. It can't be used to build roads. It can't be used to, for the local walking around money for whatever constituency group wants to get it. What he's talking about isn't that money, I don't believe. What he's talking about is the money that was never called down by the Treasury Secretary because they didn't need it for the financial stabilization activity. That money doesn't exist. That money still has to be borrowed. It's non-existent. So it's essentially a cover. He can go out and borrow the money if he wants, but he wants to have the cover of claiming, well, this was really TARP money. Well, it's not TARP money. It's borrowed money. It's from our kids, and we shouldn't do it.
Senator, can I turn your attention to health care for a moment?
Sure.
You may know there are these 5 moderate Democrats, 5 liberal Democrats getting together trying to bang out a deal here on health care. One of the things that's emerging, 2 things actually, and I want to get your read on both. One, this idea of lowering the entrance age to Medicare, allowing people between the ages of 55 and 65 to buy into the program. And 2, this idea scrapping the public option basically and instead building something that is similar to the federal employee health benefit plan. What's your read on both of those?
Well, of course, if you expand Medicare beyond senior citizens, you're putting a program which is already $38 trillion out of balance. You know, we have $38 trillion of unfunded liability in that program. You're going to put it at even more significant risk because you're going to add tens of millions of more people to the program. They claim they'll come in under an actuarial system which will increase the premium, but as a very practical matter, the program is insolvent. And so that will just aggravate the situation. That is a nationalization exercise also, I would point that out. On the issue of FEHBP, you know, that makes some sense if you do it right. If you create an opportunity for people to buy into the FEHBP at a reasonable premium, but the premium costs are going to be very, very high. And if you start subsidizing those costs significantly, you're going to drive up the cost of government, which is why this bill costs $2.5 trillion. And again, most of that cost is going to get borne by our children in their way of debt because it's not going to get paid for because the proposal here is to cut Medicare. They're going to cut Medicare and then they're going to add people to Medicare. But the proposal is to cut Medicare by $500 billion in the next 10 years. I find that hard to believe, especially if you're going to add another how many millions of people to the Medicare system under this proposal.
Senator, one last question on jobs. You saw the package that the president talked about today. I'm just curious, when you look at this, is this a similar approach to the one that you thought that President Obama would be engaging in when you had agreed earlier in the year to serve as his Commerce Secretary, or has he gone in a much different direction than you ever anticipated?
Yes, I mean, basically, this country is being aggressively taken down in a European model of government by this administration and this Congress. I mean, we are moving very far left, very fast. We've nationalized the student loan industry, basically nationalized a lot of the banks, at least briefly here. The auto industry has been nationalized, and now there's an attempt to nationalize the healthcare industry. There is a genuine belief in this administration that you create prosperity by radically expanding the size of government. I don't agree with that. I think you create prosperity by having government grow at a rate that can be afforded, which means less than GDP, and you give entrepreneurs a chance to go out and create jobs by taking risks.
Senator Gregg, Republican of New Hampshire, thank you very much, sir, for your
you.
time today. We appreciate it.